Okay, well, let's bring in our guest. Mohamad ElMasri is a professor of media studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies and a political analyst. He's been here in the studio. And Abbas Aslani is a senior research fellow at the Center for Middle East and Strategic Studies. As you can see, he's over in the Iranian capital, Tehran. Welcome, both of you. Abbas, could I start with you? Obviously, we're seeing costs spiral globally. Oil prices are through the roof. I mean, there are real concerns in governments, particularly in East Asia, about how long this standoff is going to last. And it boils down to a couple of central issues. Iran's latest formal proposal, conveyed by Pakistan, we understand, is three-stage, that talks of completely removing nuclear discussions from the table until the naval blockade, the US naval blockade, is lifted. So look, if we put no nukes aside for the time being, what is the one tangible concession Iran could offer that wouldn't be viewed by the IRGC as undermining Iran's national sovereignty?
Neve, we were seeing that there was a deadlock between Iran and the United States following the talks in Islamabad. That's why Tehran tried to somehow separate issues and untangle the progress from the process from a dead-end formula. That's why Iran tried to focus on the most immediate issues that matters to Iran and the United States as well as the region. That could be ending the hostilities in the region, which has, made, in addition to Iran and other countries in the region, somehow concerned about the consequences of such a scenario, and also reopening the Strait of Hormuz, for those even beyond the region who are worried about the, long-term, deadlock in this process, that consequences will be more visible in the weeks or months to come. So this is something, the most immediate or challenge that can be, addressed by the two sides. The Iranian foreign minister engaged in renewed discussions in Islamabad. Then he traveled to Muscat and Russia in order to see if the atmosphere could be moving toward a direction that they can somehow settle those that are within reach and accessible. And if there could be a kind of, let's say, potential agreement or a momentum, this could also contribute to future likely negotiations on remaining issues. However, the future talks were not guaranteed, but at least they could, address those who were somehow important for the both sides, and this could bring a kind of resolution. But so far, we have not been seeing a promising sign from the United States. As we are speaking, I think the chance of a military escalation is as much as a, let's say, diplomatic resolution, or even much higher than that. And everybody is having an eye on, let's say, a military escalation as well.
Do you agree with that, Mohammed? Do you think there's any kind of appetite from both sides to go back to a full-scale kinetic war, given this standoff at the moment?
I don't think there's an appetite necessarily, but there's also not an appetite for a prolonged stalemate, and that's the problem. Which side is going to blink first? I really think that the Trump administration believed and still believes that the Iranians are on their last legs and that they're on the verge of surrender, that they're on the verge of a massive oil storage crisis. Reports suggest that none of that is accurate, that perhaps this is just a massive misreading by the Trump administration. And if it is, then we could have a very prolonged standoff here. And I think that's not palatable for the Americans, nor for the Iranians. And I think that's what increases the likelihood that we are going to go back to a military confrontation at some point.
Turning back to you, Abbas, I mean, these are rather ominous signs. I mean, a return to full-scale war because we face a diplomatic standoff seems, in many ways, like a failure. Surely the Iranian people are not going to be happy with the prospect of their towns, cities, bridges, infrastructure being hit day and night?
In addition to the rhetoric we have been hearing from the two sides, or let's say the talk of talks, we are seeing that the military posture of the United States in the region is intensifying. And whether that is aimed at creating leverage or a move toward real, escalation and resuming the hostilities, I think is a serious question. But the quality, size, and amount of that military presence and arrangement in the region by the United States as well as Israel, that, in the case that far exceeds the amount of, just a psychological warfare, and it could be let's say, an attempt moving toward, let's say, resuming the attack against Iran. However, there might be some hesitations on the U.S. side because the consequences in the days or weeks to come could be also significant for the U.S. and its allies and the global energy market. So that's why I think they are making discussions, and Israel is trying to convince the United States in order to continue the attacks against Iran. And this is a serious scenario. And Iran, despite sending its foreign minister for discussions in the region, is also preparing for such a scenario. And we might be witnessing a kind of, let's say, regional war again, but this might be somehow different from the previous wars. Iran, fought 2 wars in the past. The second was different from the first one, and the third one might be different from both of the previous ones. And this indicates that the fight for creating leverage in order to somehow the U.S. trying to make Iran concede, but on the other side, Iran trying to somehow consolidate its strategic asset like the Strait of Hormuz with new protocols is yet continuous. And some are saying that that's not a matter of if, but when this conflict starts.
Abbas, Mohamad raises an interesting point about Israel. Our focus has been very much on diplomatic efforts in Pakistan. Obviously, the Israelis were not present there. That's not to say there wasn't a degree of input behind the scenes. What calculations do you think are going on in Israel at the moment as this standoff continues? Do they, as Abbas is suggesting, prefer a scenario where there is a return to a conflict within Iran itself?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. I'm of the belief that it was Israel that was a primary driver of the war. I think they wanted a regime change, and I thought they calculated that they could achieve that in short order. That was obviously wrong. That was a misreading. But I think short of that, their next best outcome would be state collapse in Iran. So I'm quite confident in saying that the Israelis are working behind the scenes on convincing the Americans to go back to war so that they can perhaps still achieve regime change, as unlikely as that prospect is. But if nothing else, then cause the collapse of the society, or, as they've said publicly, set Iran back many decades. They've talked repeatedly about bombing Iran into the Stone Age. So there's no question that Israel has an interest in escalating. But that discussion kind of dovetails with this discussion on the nuclear file. The Iranians have already made compromises on that front. And it's the Israelis that have insisted on this very hardline zero enrichment policy, which from the Iranian perspective doesn't really make a lot of sense. It doesn't jive with international law and international norms. But the Israelis have been able to convince the Trump administration to adopt that very hardline policy.
Okay, well, good to hear from both of you. Abbas Aslani in Tehran, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies, and Mohamad ElMasri, Professor of Media Studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Thank you both.